I'd like to start thanking, saying that it's a special day because two reasons. Because we're celebrating this new exhibition of Bas Jan Ader at the Simon Lee Gallery that just opened last Thursday, and also, especially today, we will have the chance to see the films here at the ICA, and we will have a roundtable conversation later. And I think it's a very unique conversation because we will have people here that have a very deep knowledge of Bas Jan Ader work, and I think, yeah, it's a unique chance to listen to them, like Mary Sue Andersen, his wife, Jan Ader, his brother, Jan Verwoert, who did a very good book about Bas Jan Ader, Janice Kerbel, Nick Baker, who curated the exhibition, and I will be participating also in the conversation, making questions and everything. So, for these reasons, of course, I want to thank the gallery for the invitation. It's a big honor for myself to be here. You are noticing already that my English is still a bit challenging, so I will try to do my best. Don't hesitate to interrupt if there's something that is not clear now or later. And just start to do this presentation. It's going to be brief, 20 minutes dropping off some ideas, some facts, some context information about Bas Jan Ader and his work, and especially fit into the films. That is the motive of our meeting today, although we are going to talk about many other things, I'm sure, so that will be open up later. Bas Jan Ader is possibly, as you might agree with me, one of the most influential artists for younger generations. But it was not always like this, especially during the 1980s, 1990s. His work, there was times in which his work was almost forgotten. During his lifetime, his work was neither extremely acknowledged, even surprising, and it can sound today. Bas Jan Ader was part of since the beginning of the group of conceptual artists. His work was published, for example, in the Avalanche magazine, which was widely distributed, and that made him to belong to this group. But he, for example, didn't participate in none of the exhibitions that created a sort of canon of conceptual art, that if we can call about that. Like When Attitudes Become Form, the exhibition in 1969 in Bern, or the Documenta in '72, where that put like a kind of a ground for a canon of conceptual art. He was not there, but he was part of this group of people. This changed in the 90s, I think, when there was a whole new wave of exhibitions about conceptual art that were more like historical reviews of the moment. And there was particularly one exhibition in Los Angeles at the MoCA, created by Ann Goldstein, titled Reconsidering Conceptual Art, that was very important in that moment to look back to all this generation of artists, and Bas Jan Ader was already there. So to me, that's an important fact in terms of their historical account of his career. He could be placed, or I would place him personally, with other very influential artists of his generation, like Robert Smithson, Gordon Matta Clark, Eva Hess, even Dan Graham, that as working with young artists and people of my generation, they are like really influential figure for all of us. And Bas Jan Ader is, without doubt, in this group of limited group of people that it's coming back all the time, his name as someone that has been influential for young artists. Most of these artists that I just mentioned died young, unfortunately. Except Dan Graham, maybe, but this explains that an artist dying young explains this fascination that grows out of the fact of them passing away. But with Bas Jan Ader is slightly different because, as you know, he disappeared in the ocean, in the Atlantic Ocean in 1975, and that created a kind of mystery or enigma that hasn't been solved, and that always raise maybe more attention or a different attention to him. It was like a magnet for many people to know what happened, what were the motivations of him to do this last project, which involved a solo, single-handed crossing of the Atlantic Ocean. This disapparition and the circumstances involved explains why he belongs both to history and myth. And this is, I think, one of the most interesting facets of Bas Jan Ader, which I'm sure we will have time to discuss later, and which in fact I think it's related to a dialectic that is present in his work between action and documentation, between reality and fiction. And it is already present in the films and, that we are going to watch today. Ader's work is unfortunately reduced. It spans over a very brief period of time, the mature work from 69 to 75 or 68, 75. He had early work before, since the early 60s, but most of the work is just 6 years. It's really amazing that we are talking about an artist, such a big artist and such an influential artist that did his work in just this short period of time. And most of it, it was made only in 2 years, in 70, 71. If you go to the checklist, catalog raisonné of his work, you will see that a lot of the works that we are watching today that has been shown all the time is just this period of 70, 71. Before that, I wanted to show you some of the early pieces. This is him standing in the with the pieces that he showed at his MFA show in Claremont, in California, in 1967. This is the poster for that show, and that's the roof of the house where he did later the film that we are going to watch today, Fall. This is the same show, which was conceived like a kind of unique environment or installation, or with all the pieces were in dialogue. This is another piece in that show. Here I'm showing you some experiments that he did with photography in the period 66-68. They are not works themselves, let's say, but they are the pieces that he did learning how to take pictures and photography, and he was interested in how to develop them. Also working with Marisu together on learning at the same time how to do this. And this is one of the prints that we found during the research that we have been doing together. And I found it very interesting because you see here this table that is kind of unstable. And this piece in the show in 67, and here with the chair, similar situation. This is another picture of that period of early period of experimentation with photography. And this is already a work, one of the earliest works of the conceptual period, we could call it. The artist as a consumer of extreme comfort. And he's there reading a book by the fireplace with the dog. Another work, Please Don't Leave Me. And these are already pieces from 1970, All My Clothes, again, the same house and the same chimney in Claremont. And again, another piece from 1970. So this is already the same chronology as the films. And I wanted to answer or to question myself what happened in this period that everything came out, like in 70 and 71, like an implosion. That was one of his favorite words, an implosion of work. What happened? And it's difficult to answer, but to start with, we can say that he got in late 69, early 70, he got his first job, a stable job or full-time job at a community college in Walnut. It's a town near Claremont, where they were living in the 60s and 70s, called Mount San Antonio. So he got a job and he started to teach. And maybe that was a period of maturity also for himself after doing the MFA in 67. And a lot of things happened from that moment on. It's also interesting. I want to mention also that the place where where he was working in 1970, Claremont, this town in the east of Los Angeles, is part of what they call East LA, which is all this area. This a huge suburb spanning from downtown LA to San Bernardino, which is already into the desert. And this is this is a town that this is Claremont, where he did most of these works. And I like to mention this because sometimes, of course, we relate him to Los Angeles, and doubly he's related to Los Angeles, but it's a particular geography of Los Angeles. It's a city that has a lot of different scenes, art scenes, the beach artists, the Hollywood artists, the Topanga artists, a lot of different environments, and he was working out there in this suburb in Claremont, which was actually a very, and it is still a very pretty area, because it used to be a place with a lot of nature, with the mountains, orange groves. It's not like that anymore, but it used to be like the idyllic suburb of the 60s of America, that idea of middle class living that we have of America in the 60s. And they have this beautiful college that is still a very good college in Claremont, and school that pretty much looks like an East Coast nice small town, university town. So I'm saying this to link his work with also not only with this kind of peripheral, we can say, situation, but also domestic situation. If you look back at all these pieces, they are all related to the home, right? To the domesticity. So there is something in this space that probably inspired him to work with these conditions. To some degree, this helps us to understand also the human scale of the works and the films, and also a kind of amateurish attitude towards film that we will see now. It's a very simple, straightforward approach to the medium, as many other artists of his generation had. And that was maybe you wanted to put it like opposed to the big productions, monumental productions of Hollywood that was right there next to them. These works that I'm explaining that came out of this suburban environment were not indulgent with this space. They had a friction. They created a friction or a tension with the comfort of this context, like we saw in the artist as a consumer of extreme comfort, or in the fall films that we're going to see now, as if there was a longing or a wish for a more adventurous, intense, exciting life beyond this middle-class existence that surrounded that area. Bas Jan Ader shot the fall films that were the first to be shot with the help of Mary Sue Andersen, his wife, and with his friend, the artist William Labitte. They used to do that some more pictures that I had of the house in Claremont. This is the famous roof from which he rolled down. And they shot it with this Bell and Howell camera, which was a 16mm camera from the 1940s, which, as you might know, these cameras were very popular during the 1960s, especially because they were relatively accessible and easy to transport and to operate. When Ader began to film his performances in the early 70s, there were other artists in California that were doing similar things. There were people like, for example, William Beckman, working with video, not with film, which is a small difference, but he was doing these performances at his studio in Santa Monica. And Bas Jan Ader knew about this work. We could place Beckman's films together with this trend, which some people call the visual puns, like visual jokes. Another artist would be doing this kind of short slapstick videos, like Baldessari teaching the alphabet to a plant, or Alan Ruppersberg trying to escape from a straitjacket. This kind of short videos with this kind of humor. There was an economy of means and a spontaneity and a humor present in all this artist's work, and also in Bas Jan Ader's when he let him fall down from the roof. No, there is some absurdity to these situations. The main difference, perhaps, was the content. Other films were always focused, you will see it now, on him doing something, normally provoking a fall or an accident. While Beckman's films are not focused only on his action, for example, with the case of Beckman, and sometimes he's even off camera. Beckman doesn't necessarily to be present in the image, and he's also co-starring with the dogs, his famous dogs, and that was not the case of Bas Jan Ader. He always had to be there, and it was about his presence a lot about his presence in the image. And it's important to notice this presence because it was not at all casual. It was the presence, you saw the first image that I had when I started to talk, the presence of a young, charming, mysterious European, even in such an awkward situations as falling from a roof or falling into a canal. And Ader was aware of the effects that his physical presence provoked, and to some extent he cultivated that persona that was part of this blending of art and life that he was interested in. Of course, other references were not only artistic. He also liked the cinema, especially the 1920s slapstick comedies of W.C. Fields, Buster Keaton. He liked the humor of these comedians, especially Buster Keaton. There seems to be a relation between this existential humor that they both, and kind of resigned attitude that they both shared. Some people like writers like Georg Heiser have written about this relation with slapstick comedy, and have shown the analogies between other movies and the structure of gags, for example. That is something that we are going to watch now. Like both involve short actions that are suppressive or unexpected, without words. They are silent films and purely visual. It's interesting because expression in these films is reduced to the minimum, usually just a gesture. And that's how he reaches in these films some certain kind of abstraction. And another writer has, is actually Jan Verwoert, that is joining later us today. He wrote very nice pages about this idea of abstraction and concision in the films of Bas Jan Ader, and how he isolated an idea, for example, crying or sadness in a movie, but without letting us know for the reasons that move him into this situation. So creating this very specific image that leave a lot of room for us or for the viewer to project himself or herself into the image and to guess what the reasons for that could be. So making it very universal. That happens also, I think, with the folds that we will see now. They are very concise pieces. Brevity and precision in other films is not only related to the content and to this idea of abstraction, but also to his artistic, not to his artistic or cultural reference, but also to the technique. The 16mm film rolls that he was using had a limited length, and development for these artists that were working by themselves was expensive. They didn't have all the budget to develop a lot of film usually. So that's why these films were a lot of times very short and precise. So they had to know what they were doing when they were doing these actions. They had to be very sure of, not very sure, but they have to be very aware of what they were looking for, because it was not like video where you can, or like a phone where you can record and delete and record and delete. What happened in that moment, that was the piece. So that's something specific of film and 16mm film especially. This didn't help the films of having a very clear dramatic structure that we will see again. Like they have an introduction, a development, and a conclusion, even if it's only 15 seconds. What is missing in these films is addition on a more elaborate level. The films are very simple, and all the action is there. There is no ellipses with a space or time, or no tricks. And sometimes when it's tempted to say that fiction or artifice seems to be absent of these films, like if it could be intentional, like it would be a very literal action. And that's why I think it's important to have always in mind this idea of the medium, no? Because it's also like a historical content of the work. Like when you go and when you go to the Simon Lee Gallery, and you will see today we will see them in digital in a digital projection. But if you go to the Simon Lee Gallery and you see the projector, you know the movement, the noise of the machine, the projection, the size of the machine, all that are historical information of the works that I think it's interesting to have in mind. Ader did show his films. This is a fact that I just realized. preparing the presentation, very few occasions before he went to this trip in 1975. He had the films exhibited at the Sonsbeek Wittendeparken exhibition in Arnhem, Holland, in the summer of '71. He showed the Broken Fall Organic in this gallery in Bremerhaven, a very important gallery for conceptual art, called Cabinet für Aktuelle Kunst. He showed the Broken Fall piece. But in very few times after that. Most of the time he would show the photographic versions of these films. And here I have some about the medium, have some shots of the exhibition that I curated in Santiago de Compostela in 2010, just to give a glimpse of how they look. But this is what I wanted to show, really, that the relation between photography and film. Most of the times, in most of the most important solo exhibitions in Pomona or in Bremerhaven or in the Saman Gallery in Genova or the Claire Copley Gallery in Los Angeles, he showed these photographies. Like, for example, what you see in the upper left part, that's the photographic version of Fall 1 and Fall 2, the films that we are going to watch today. And it's, I think it's 10 frames of these films, the roof fall and the canal fall. And that was part of an exhibition in 1972 in Pomona. And it was also his first major exhibition in Los Angeles, together with other artists that were very close to him, William Lavitt and Herr van Elk. This here is I think this is the Bremerhaven exhibition, and this is the In Search of the Miraculous Why Night in Los Angeles, which is this series of 14, 18, there are two versions, photographies. That this is also very interesting because it's a photo piece, but it's completely cinematographic. When we look at it, it's like a movie in still images. And that's again the same One Night in Los Angeles in Italy, in Saman Gallery in '75. To finish the presentation, I want to say just that regarding the contents, I say that the films are humorous and they are funny sometimes, but not only. It could be more exact, maybe, to say that the films are tragicomic, because there is a part of tragedy present, especially in some of them. It is very obvious. So they are, as all Bas Jan Ader works, at some point between humor and sadness or desaparition. From an artistic or art historical point of view, this commitment of Ader with tragedy and comedy put him, I think, on a very interesting place regarding representation and the history of representation, in some interesting point between reality and fiction. I think a masterwork in relation to this idea is, well, this is another example of how he played with photo and film with the same works in different mediums, right? This is also shown at the Simon Lee Gallery right now. You can see it there. And again, I'm too sad to tell you, this is one of these pieces that I say that they are lingering between reality and fiction. This is a work in which, by one side, we find all this cultural reference. He wrote about that in a piece of paper, like some notes for this work, that they would be making reference, like, for example, to the descendants of Roger van der Weyden, or the Guernica, that has these big figures, like being like tears. So they are about sadness and about moving the person that is looking at them. But on the other, it was also a setup. It was a performance. And it had also influence of melodrama. So we can't say whether he's playing a role or going deep into his own feelings to find this sadness, or both. Very recently, an artist that met Bas Jan Ader in the 1970s, Richard Jardine, he's an artist that used to be teaching at the Nova Scotia College of Art and Design in Halifax, and another did a piece there in 1973, told me something that is very interesting about this relation. And I will read what Richard Jardine said to me. He said, "The work interested me because it was impossible to tell if it was genuine or stage, and if genuine, what exactly was so sad. So the irony of that was interesting. At the time, I remember some discussion with women colleagues who insisted that irony was something that men embraced, a way of inserting emotional distance into a situation. Over the years, I come to see that that insight is generally true. Along the same lines, his friend William Lavitt, the artist based in Los Angeles, used to say that Ader was interested in essence, in truth, and authenticity, as opposed to them California artists interested in artificiality, which creates also an opposition between America or a relation between America and Europe that is also very present in his work. For Levitt, Bas Jan Ader work was an attempt to join art and life without illusionism. And he was not the only artist of that generation searching for this aim, of course. Questioning illusionism was a big political and philosophical issue in the late 60s. We can think, for example, of structural cinema or even the Nouvelle Vague. In fact, it was this time in the shifting point between modernism and postmodernism, which is obviously something involved on Levitt's commentary between artificiality and authenticity. It seems that his last voyage was pointing into this direction, trying to make an art work rigorous, philosophical, and without tricks, as Levitt said. To do that, he found that he had to measure himself with the ocean. And I wonder, did he achieve what he was looking for? Did his work get rid of illusionism and fiction? Did he succeed? Thank you.
Failing, falling, searching, laughing, crying, dying. Or perhaps falling, crying, searching, failing, dying, laughing. Most summer evenings of my childhood would end in tears, as I was preoccupied by an indistinguishable and senseless desire to ride my bike with my right hand on the left handlebar and left hand on the right. What seemed a simple enough task proved over many years to be physically impossible. Over the course of 5 summers, I broke my front tooth, cracked my tailbone, suffered 2 concussions, and destroyed 4 bikes. A blow to the head causes movement of the skull. When the skull moves, the brain moves. When the skull moves suddenly and with force, the brain is thrust against the skull and compresses. Such an incident can result in a heightened sensitivity to sound and is often associated with the trill of circling, chirping birds. Similarly, pressing a key on a piano keyboard initiates a felt-covered hammer to strike a steel string. The hammer rebounds and the string vibrates at its resonant frequency. This vibration is transmitted to a sounding board that couples the acoustic energy of air. The greater the velocity with which a key is pressed, the greater the force of the hammer, and the louder the sound produced. It is perhaps not surprising that a large object, for example a piano, falling from a height also produces its own sound through the displacement of air. This sound is oddly reminiscent of the call of a flute, or more precisely, a piccolo or a wood thrush. My mother calls to say she would like to buy me and each of my 2 sisters a gift. It would mean a lot to her, she says, 1 for each of you. A warm feeling rushes through me, a natural response to this unexpected gesture of love. Yes, she says, I've been thinking about it for months. It is Wednesday, I'm in the studio and happy for the distraction. I push aside whatever it is I am doing and settle into the anticipation that has suddenly arisen. I would like to buy you a plot, she says. There is a pause and she clarifies. A burial plot. In 458 BC, Aeschylus was killed by a tortoise dropped by an eagle that had mistaken his head for a rock suitable for shattering the shell of a reptile. It is believed that he had been staying outdoors to avoid a prophecy that he would be killed by a falling object. According to the rule of cartoon physics, all principles of gravity are negated by fear. Governed by a relatively consistent set of laws, preferential rather than referential, subjective and variable rather than objective and fixed, the world of animation behaves differently from the real world, but not randomly so. A body suspended in space will remain there until made aware of its situation. A body passing through solid matter, usually at high speed, will leave a perforation conforming to its perimeter. Holes or passages are portable but not traversable by all. And everything and anything falls faster than an anvil. Just like the brain has a cognitive bias that is difficult to conquer, knowledge is not the same as understanding. 3 accounts. 1. A common parakeet lived in a suspended birdcage in the corner of our family kitchen. He was fed daily, spoken to often, and generally loved, if at times ignored. Once a year, on his birthday, the door to his cage would be left open, and he was allowed to fly freely around the house for an hour after supper. This would result in the excitement of children, some displaced items, and an inevitable struggle to return him to his roost. At the start of his 8th year, he flew into an open pantry cupboard, found his way into the space between sideboard and skirting, and never returned. 2. From a particular spot I know and love, a small white cabin appears perfectly perched on the branch of an old jack pine tree. Over 150 feet high and close to 300 years old, the tree stands at the base of a hill, with the cabin directly across from it on the opposite side of a lake. Both emerge at the same time every morning through a heavy mist that lifts off the surface of the lake, the effects of warm water meeting cool air. One summer, both tree and house are struck by lightning on the very same night. The tree splits down the middle, its branch crashing to the ground. The cabin catches fire and burns to a pile of ash. And lastly, 3. Distracted by the physicality of things, I purchase a train ticket from London to Eastbourne. From the station, it's a steady, brisk walk to the top of a chalky headland. The highest sea cliff in Britain, it is surrounded by water on 3 sides. The summit is a lush, grassy plain fringed by a violent edge. I am alone, and it's windy. After walking a distance, I see a man in a purple jacket. I describe it as fleece. I later learn it to be blue. He is perched on the cliff's rim, closer to the edge than I would dare go. He is crouched, almost, and looks like a puffin with 3 legs. As he uses one arm for balance, I watch him, but he does not see me. It is very, very quiet, and we are alone. The man is looking at something. He is looking for something. His arm stretches out, returns back to the ground, and then reaches forward again as he tries to pluck whatever it is before him from the air. A bird, I think. An insect, maybe. Feeling bold, I take his picture. I don't know why. My arms come down. He bends his knees. A brief moment passes, and he leaps forward, drawing a closing arc in the sky. Thank you.
Okay, so I think there are many things I'm sure we can discuss about coming out, as I said, like taking the films, which was the motive of our meeting today, as a starting point, and there are a few things that we can comment on those, but I'm sure that there are many other things that we are going to talk about, and I'm also sure that the beautiful text by Janice will help also to inspire some more questions and comments. But I just would like to open the conversation. And I had a question. I have many, but there's one that is a little bit silly, or maybe not. And I would like to start with that. And it's something that I would like to ask to Marisu and Erik. And I wonder whether Bas Jan ever dreamed of becoming an actor.
And when I knew him, he didn't think about being an actor. Sometimes he'd think about being a rock and roll star, however. And then we'd think about whether we sang well enough or were able to do that. Couldn't. But he did. He and Gerban Elk were together in California, in Los Angeles, for several months in one year, just after Bas Jan got there. And they talked a lot about, and I think did go to a movie studio, and they knocked on the front door of the movie studio and told them that here they were, the beautiful young men from Holland. They didn't say that, but I did. And I think that wasn't any attempt to be an actor, but to make a work of art.
Thank you. Erik?
Well, to the best of my knowledge, I think ever since he was 14 years old, or about that age, did he know that he wanted to become an artist, and he consistently worked into that direction ever since. So I think that's clear, but he did do a lot of clowning around.
Well, I don't know if you would like to comment a little bit more about the film reference in Los Angeles, what it is, Hollywood, all this, the cultural environment in LA when you were there, especially in the 60s, mostly was cinema, right? Mm-hmm. How was that for him? What were you looking at? What were things that he was?
We were going to the Andy Warhol films, and they were a really good example of what he ended up not wanting to do, because some of them lasted hours. And I couldn't take it myself, and I don't think he stayed all the time for any one of them. But, and we didn't ever go to American movies for some reason, maybe because they were just not up our alley. And, but we did go to, we lived in Claremont for the first 6 years. And we would go into Los Angeles, into on Santa Monica Boulevard and Western. And LA is this great old movie theater, and they would play all of the best foreign films, and we had a really great time doing that. I think the best influence that there was probably Andy Warhol's movie. I think that if Bas Jan's had lasted that long, if Bas's had lasted that long, I'm not sure I would have watched the end of those either. Sorry, Bas.
And what about those references to slapstick comedy that I mentioned, like Buster Keaton? Did he like those movies? W.C. Fields, Chaplin?
We always, of course, loved Buster Keaton, but he really adored, if you could say that ever, W.C. Fields, and he would make Fields' hand gestures and facial, expressions and talk out of the side of his mouth. And if you haven't seen W.C. Fields yet, you should really make an effort to rent one of his movies. They're also short. They're not that short, but short. And he made, probably about 10 to 15 really great movies. I personally like his better than Buster Keaton's, but that's me, not Bas.
Erik, do you have any memories of watching films together? Some of the references, or maybe other cultural reference? I don't know. You would like to mention?
No, I don't think we ever went together to the cinema. I think the only thing we really talked about was literature, but unfortunately for the audience, that was Dutch literature, so the authors won't mean much to you. Particularly a writer called Gerard Reeve. He also published in English, but he was a master of language and very difficult to translate, therefore, so fairly accessible to a non-Dutch audience.
And what about the other, opening now the questions to everybody, like other cultural, artistic reference, like I mentioned Bill Beckman. I don't know if you can, would you want to elaborate a little bit more on that?
Well, I think Wegman was very humorous, and Bas Jan knew of all of the LA people doing art at that time, but he wasn't living in Claremont and not hanging out in LA at the time, which was kind of dangerous. Was enabled him to not kind of join that movement with wholeheartedly. And I'm talking about Wegman and Baldessari and a couple of other guys that were doing films at the time. Bas Jan wasn't a joiner of groups, and so it wasn't, he might appreciate somebody's work. He appreciated maybe Baldessari more than his work. And that's how it would go with Bas Jan. You wouldn't be able to pin him down with any particular influence, for the most part.
Okay, then Erik, please.
Well, it's more on the intersection of our philosophy and literature, but he was very strongly influenced and very much appreciated the philosopher Camus, and particularly the myth of Sisyphus. I think if you want to understand his work, you would be well advised to read it or reread it.
Thank you. Nick or Janice, do you have any comments on this? As Jan's work in this context?
Well, I was very taken, particularly with this first image that you showed, Pedro, in your paper about the MFA show image, and I was particularly struck by the sort of presence, the programmatic nature of that very small group of works, and the presence somehow of what seem to be the core ideas that follow. And I kind of wanted to ask both Meliksetian and Erik if to what extent he had all of this work already somehow worked out in his mind. To what extent it was all there before he made the move back to Amsterdam, because it's tempting often to look back with the benefit of hindsight and think that there is a presence there, and it can be an illusion. So I just wonder how much that you think that's the case.
I think that his core idea formed. I mean, it might have been bits and pieces here and there, but I think it all kind of came together and gelled in that 1 year, and that was like the year before when he got his master's degree, MFA, at Claremont University, and Claremont Graduate School, sorry. And you can look back at his work all through the period that he was at Otis Art Institute and at Claremont and see some perhaps ties into that final show, but nothing as clear as that was.
And before he left, when he was still in the Netherlands, were those ideas there already?
Well, I did refer to Camus. He was in the States on an exchange program, I think from 1966 till 61, and he then took a maximum amount of art classes. He was in high school in that exchange program. And he produced work which was seen as good enough to be shown in a gallery. I think he was 17 at the time, 17 or 18. And not only that he was shown in the gallery, but he also was then interviewed by a local or regional paper. And in that interview, you could almost say he gave already there and then the program for his work and later artistic work and maybe even for his life. Referring to interview to Camus and saying something, well, I hesitate to quote because I should know the precise quote, otherwise there's the risk of doing him injustice. But it was something like, like Camus, we know that we'll always be falling morally and physically, but we should not give up striving. And then, of course, that's clearly referring to the myth of Sisyphus. So I think there was that clear element in it already, and maybe that to some extent, if not a large extent, also has to do with the fact that his father was heavily involved in the Dutch resistance in the Second World War and did not survive, did fall, but nevertheless he strived.
I have to add here that in that article, I think the first line of the article was making art is like having sex. That was from the 17-year-old. That's very typical of all of his life. It's also one snappy thing to say and then something very serious to go into.
Was that the snappy or the serious? I mean, it's funny actually that there's something about oblivion in there as well. You see so much a connecting strand of a search for oblivion, which I'm sure we'll talk about. But I guess the idea of sex, the petit mort, as a momentary loss of self, is very close to, maybe it's not so flippant.
Maybe not. I'll have to rethink that one. I just liked it. Go ahead.
We like to also talk about the process of how these films and other works were done, because you were there most of the times, Marisu. You were behind the camera in Claremont with the Falls. You were behind the camera when you were wandering in Los Angeles at night from the mountains to the beach, walking through the freeways that might be dangerous. How was that? How was the process? How was the conversation with Bas Jan when you were doing those works?
in both of those cases, when I was filming the fall pieces, next to me was also Bill Levitt, and in the Amsterdam Fall, Ger van Elk was across the bridge taking photos from the other side. And there are some of those photos that are also published and printed. And it had to be pretty well placed, the tripod, obviously, with the heavy little camera. It had to be well placed, and so that took some time figuring out how far away to get the best view of the whole scene. And Bas Jan we'd go back and forth, and finally he'd decide where he was going to position himself and then the camera. The camera was, I don't know if you noticed it, but it's like a wind-up toy. You just have to keep winding it up in order for it to go, because that's literally how it ran. Nothing about batteries then. But it worked. Jeez. I thought that was so great. And it was comfortable to work with. And when we talked about the fall piece and what it was about, we didn't talk about the essence of what it was, and we didn't. It's like we didn't have to. I knew where he was going with it, at least to some degree. I don't think I ever knew fully what his aim was, or I would have my view of what it was, and that would probably the one that stuck anyway. And when we walked around, we went from the Hollywood freeway up close to inside Hollywood, and gradually went into East LA and East LA, and then circled around and went through some tunnels and things like that. And he would be there ahead of me, and he trusted me to know how far he should go and what the light should be like. And although we bracketed, which was, we'd change the f-stops or we'd change the speed. And we'd also push the film from 16 something to 32. I can't remember what it's supposed to be. What is that? 16.
The exposure rating, or the exposure rating.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, that's beside the point. Except it exposes, of course, that I'm not an expert in photography by any means. But I knew what we were doing, and that was what was important. That took a whole night, as you saw, and when you see that piece. And we went everywhere, and through Hollywood and through Beverly Hills and all kinds of places that would sort of create that perfect scene with the light behind and the background being dark enough for the flashlight to show, because he was holding a flashlight the whole time, and he was looking in corners and over the walls and around the rocks and so forth. And it was a very serious process while we were doing it. It wasn't funny at all. And that's a piece that I don't really think of as being funny or amusing. I mean, it has its elements, but I think of it more as the first step to, as I knew later on, I didn't know that then, but the first step to his triptych of In Search of the Miraculous. The piece, I think, is one of my, I admire it a lot.
Yeah. And Erik, you help him with the piece that is shown at the Simon Lee Gallery, 2 slides, and he's standing in a forest in Sweden, right? And he's standing in one of them, and in the other he's fallen down. You helped him and took those pictures. Can you tell us about that moment? And also, you were doing a trip there. What were the motivations for that piece? How that came up?
Well, I have to disappoint you. We didn't talk much about his art, and that's an understatement. He didn't say, well, I'm going to do this piece, and it's because of that, and I'm going to explain it in full detail. We were in Stockholm. We were visiting friends. We had been with the friends also in their, what we call it, dacha in the in the archipelago, and had a good time there briefly because he basically, I think, went there to do photographing, doing a piece. So we also went to the State Forestry Agency in Stockholm, where he tried to find where they would be cutting forest woods the next day when we were traveling from Stockholm to Gothenburg anyway on our way home, where we could take photographs. And so the coordinates were given. We went there and found men in very big machines, being sort of very surprised that we turned up. And I think then Bas Jan explained what we were going to do, take these photographs, one in a situation where he was standing up amidst standing trees and then would be shot as well photographically while trees had been felled and he had been felled. Well, they were sort of slightly reluctant and slightly surprised because they came with all their security items that you have to wear hard hats and this and that, and you're not allowed on the terrain when we're working, etc., etc. But he managed to convince them, and so we set up a tripod, and he stood there, and of course he was in charge. He was where the tripod would be, where he would be, what the light would be. We checked it, and all I had to do basically was push the button, check on the light, last minute, last second, and then repeat the whole thing from the very same position where he was lying down. But it's, of course, it doesn't make much sense if you haven't seen these two slides side by side. But I think it's a very strong piece. But I was a witness in the process, and I had a very minor role.
I think it's interesting what you're saying about him not speaking about the work or just talking about. I heard from other people, students, for example, in Los Angeles, he would speak about the work always in a very formal way, which is one side of I would like to talk about from now on, like the composition, the formal references that are in his work. I think that's the thesis or one of the main ideas of the show that Nick curated at the gallery, right? All the composition, the formal working that is in the work, and he addresses it that way when he spoke about the work to his students. For example, he would say, like, I'm just had to tell you it's like a painting. It's the tear is the painting and the face is the canvas, and he would spoke about any of the motivations or any of the more psychological probably ideas. In this piece in Sweden, some people we know that it reminds also the scene of your father, right? Being brought to the forest, and that was where he died, right? So there are connections also with personal issues, and I'm curious about this thing between his biography, his experiences, and the way he built his work.
Yeah, of course, that's a very difficult question. I think there is a clear relationship, but not one-on-one. It's much more complex. I'm also very glad that he didn't talk much about his work, not with me, not with my friends. He was asked many times, but for instance, on his trip to Sweden, we didn't talk about it. I remember that when the piece was made, it gave me some sense of discomfort, I suppose, because of the felt allusions to. But you could also say, well, in that sense, it was self-explaining. But I'm glad he didn't talk about it because, yeah, you see so many sort of statements filled with gravitas by artists, and they are so trivial. I'm very happy that there's none of that on record on his part. He wouldn't do that simply, and so I think that's partly why he was reluctant to talk about it.
Nick, do you have any comments?
Actually, I wanted to ask Janice really about this point, because you touched, for me, on many points through your reading of connection and similarity and dissimilarity and influence and so on, but particularly two, one at the opening and the other at the closing. And the opening for me, when you're talking about riding a bike with your hands crossed, seems to refer very much to the practical, technical, executional, compositional strategies of how the work is made, and the decision about control and loss and control and changing the way the brain is wired and so on, which is obviously a very important part of the connection. And then this connection of the Eastbourne Fall at the end, which is much more about, for me, it seems much more about the emotional response, the kind of sense of loss, and the things which perhaps from the mythology that you talked about we're more familiar with. And it seemed like what you did, I loved the way that you combined these two, you brought these two together, you sort of traced a line between these two. And I wondered if you could say something about, since we're looking at the legacy of the artist's work and the influence, say something about the way you feel the distinction of these two ways of reading the work has affected you.
I think two things that I really thought about in trying to find a way to speak about Bas Jan's work today was this, something that's very close to me is this idea of like isolating an action from the narrative on either side. So it's either it's an event or it's a moment. But as a result of that, I think you have to then deal with this moment or this event or this episode or whatever it is formally, because you don't know there's no other possible way of dealing with it. And I was thinking about that earlier as well when you were talking about the influence of film on his work. And I wondered, well, the thing with film, though, is when you watch it is that you can, if you want to, see what happens before it or after it. And I was wondering about a potential influence of theater, because a moment can be enacted without, it doesn't have to be bracketed. And I wondered a bit about that. And now I forget the second part of your question, which I had an answer to, but can you just...
Sure. Just looking at these two very different sort of readings of the work, one which is a gut response and very emotional, and the other which is more intellectual.
But I don't know if they're different, right? And that's the other thing I was thinking about, because when I sat down to think about his work, I always experienced it in a way which was very formal, in the way that I think, well, that's just, that's why I respond to it. But at the same time, so I sat down, I was really thinking about it, I thought, oh, well, I'd really like to think about this in terms of some kind of humor, but where your expectation is thwarted, some kind of anti-humor. And then when I was standing there reading it, I was very, very shocked at how black what I had written was. I actually thought what I wrote, when I read it this morning to myself, I thought, oh yeah, okay, that seems to have the right balance between what's funny and what's not funny and what's black and on and on. And I stood there and I thought, oh my God, this is really super black. And I thought, well, maybe for me that's something very interesting that actually is very much inspired by his work, is that you don't know how to separate those two elements.
Marissa, do you have any comments on these ideas that Janice has been talking?
It's something I've experienced myself, and when you are around his work and around him, there's always that contradiction. It's never with him one way or the other with his work, and it depends. I mean, everybody responds to it in a different way, and of course, everybody's individual way of responding is their own. So nobody can argue with that. But I think that you're right about about the I don't know, the formality of it, the formality of the work that he produces. I mean, you can talk to him about that after the fact, of course, but you can recognize that there were issues and that those issues were dealt with to some degree.
I was thinking, I would like to ask to Janice if this dialogue between humor and tragedy or sadness in work, I would translate it to another synonym like reality and fiction. What can be solved and what can't be solved. What is, it's like it is, and there is no solution for it. And what is a solution in comedy, it's not real. We know that whatever happens in a movie, it's not real, and it has a solution. Life goes on. Tragedy is something that has not that kind of rewind possibility. And I was thinking if I'm thinking myself of Bas Jan Ader, and I'm trying to think about his relevance as an artist in art history. Is this like an original point he made with a very pure and very specific approach to a problem for all artists, representation, relation between reality and fiction? Is this something that you think about?
Yeah, absolutely. This idea that there's, I think as you said when you were speaking, this idea of no disallowing any kind of artifice. So it had to be enacted in real time. It's a document that we have. And then that it doesn't actually, I don't even think they function as documents. They function then as things, you know. And that's as real as the event that he enacts, or as the kind of persistence that he demonstrates over and over again, you know. And I think that, there's something about this idea of persistence in the object that I think is really, I don't understand what that is, but that was something I was trying to understand, I think.
I'm interested, Marisa, were those films all done in a single take? Were there other takes?
No, they were done. We might have done them. They were shot longer, of course, than the actual film ended up being. So it was edited down from one long shot.
But were there trials? I mean, or was it, this happens once and you get it?
Yeah.
You mean he went into the canal and into the ditch 10 times?
Or the next day dried off and tried it? I mean,
no.
In terms of thinking about that moment of control, because it was interesting to see them in the sequence that we saw them in today. Not only do the films get longer, but that moment of nullity, that moment of suspense, the moment between deciding to fall and falling on the roof, which is a split second in the first one, and by the time you get to the end and nightfall, it's pretty long.
Yeah. Really
And
long.
seeing them all in that sequence it's a very interesting kind of illumination in a way of this project to extend that moment of disappearance or something. And so that's why for me it's remarkable that can be done on a single take for each one.
I'm not sure about Nightfall, but I know about the others were including. I'm not sure about. I'm too sad to tell you that was filmed by Peter Bakker in Amsterdam when I was off making money, and but for all of the rest of the ones that I had any part in were one shot, one long shot that we could pull things out of and edit. But it was, no, we never went back and did it over again.
That's, I think it connects with also the comments about the relation between that he was so systematic also in doing all these projects in film, moving image, and still image. If we can have a chance to look at the booklet that he made with the fall, he did a book for the fall pieces, right, for the roof and the canal. And I show the image of the pictures in the Pomona exhibition, remember? And there are 10 frames. So when you look at that book, and you have time to relay on that. The film is 15 seconds, but when you have the book, you start to look at it, and all the details, it's like a slow motion fall, and it connects very much with what you just said. And I think that's maybe also has to do with intention of doing the works in both mediums, no, like allowing you to approach them in different situations.
Another thing that he was known to say, and I can't remember who he said it to last, but anyway, it was probably Bill or somebody. He would say when people would ask him why he didn't make more artworks, and he would say that he only, it's pretty pompous sounding, but it's the way he did his work. He would say, I only realize a work of art when I know it's going to be a masterpiece. And it's pretty cocky, don't you think? But on the other hand, I think in his mind at least, whatever he did was worth doing. And that way, then he would think it out, and it would take a while before we'd get to actually doing the film. But when he did the film, it was done.
I was thinking about what you were saying about the relationship between the films and the still photographs, and this idea that I know it's written about a lot in terms of how people look at his work, this idea of a kind of rational distance that enables you to think differently about a moment. And one thing that I wonder about, and I'm not sure, is like the photographs don't seem to allow for any more rational distance than the films do, because I think they should, but they don't. And this is so maybe it's like the distance is about the kind of separation from any kind of lived experience. I was recently watching all these, I watched a lot of cartoons at home, well, just because I have a kid, but, and the thing that it seems to satisfy us both, is when you watch the compilations, like the Roadrunner compilations or the Bugs Bunny compilations, where you don't have to get the build-up or anything after, you just get to watch these events, and that's incredibly thrilling. And I'm wondering about this.
Of the last moment when he's going down under the anvil and around off the cliff. It was just that part of each film, or was it the whole film?
No, it's like it's not just the brutal bit, but it's the good bit. When they, if Bugs Bunny's on a plank and Yosemite Sam cuts the plank, but you don't have to get the whole thing of him climbing up to the top, explaining why he's there. But it's just something about allowing some kind of rational distance in different ways, I think, is what I want to get back to, about why isn't it that the photographs make it even more distant.
Okay, great. So Rosalie is telling me that we can open the discussion for the audience. So please feel free to raise your hand and ask for a microphone, I guess, and participate.
Hi. I read Alexander Dumbadze's book from about 4 years ago, and he mentioned the rumor of an artwork that involved selling your car and investing the money in stocks. And I want to know whether that was a rumor, or whether it was a work, or whether it could be both, and how you felt about it.
We didn't have to sell the car. We just invested in the commodity market, and he was very interested in, I don't know what that's called, I think graphing the cycle of the whole process of compiling the wheat or the soybeans, and then how that might build up or go down, and so the cycle of the year of soybeans, for instance, or are there ways of predicting what that cycle, where it might go next? And he did a lot of reading and some studying, and then some actual practice of doing that cycling, graphing the cycling of the ups and downs of the market for soybeans. And I should mention then what happened, he wasn't able to predict, I think, that, and I don't think very many other people were either, because a lot of people lost their shirts on the fact that the market for soybeans dumped out. And so some of them had either put in bids for, I don't even know the language, sorry about that, for the market to go up, and others had bet on the market going down. And some of those people who did all of that, and so I think some were able to cover their tail feathers, but Bas Jan was able to get out just where we started. So he didn't lose anything, but we also we never saved anything by working from the commodities market. I wouldn't recommend it, and we didn't sell our car. It was my car to begin with, so
I heard that it was your car that he'd sold,
Yeah.
But then he didn't document this piece either, so he ended up flat broke, just neutral and undocumented.
Yeah, not flat broke, but definitely
Even, sorry,
broker. We had hopes, I mean, you start doing something like that and you start spending the money. And that's such a painful thing to watch people go through.
But can I add a question, and that is, what was the relation to art? Did he consider that art? I mean, plenty of people speculate in every kind of market, but where was the relationship with art?
It was the process of predicting and graphing the cycles of the market. That was what was of most interest to him, I think, and that he told Richard Jardin that he was going to be a millionaire by the time he was 30, and that was, of course, when he was 28, and so he had high expectations of his ability to master the market, and that would have been art,
Well, also there is the notion of risk of investing in a market that you don't know what was going to happen, and his work involved the idea of risk at different levels. So, but it's, I think, what I can comment about that is that I think it's this blending of art and life that is all the time very, very close in his work and in his life. It's like all these things that happened to him had some translation into the artworks and vice versa. And also the idea of these rumors, that are more and more with Bas Jan Ader than with other artists. I think all these things that happen, stories that we project on him that sometimes are not certain or not correct or not objective, but it's triggering all this imagination and ideas on people. Anyway, some more questions, please.
Just to catch up on that point with being mastering, and that you were saying he wouldn't make a work unless it was a masterwork.
Right.
I mean, I think there's something ironic there, obviously, playing with the other characters in the art world at the time. And something that I'm interested in is the poetics, the poetry in the work, and how that relates to fiction and the real. And maybe you could speak more about that in relation to the sort of mythic fetishization of the framing the art world and the art objects that he obviously is famous for. I think there's a lot more in there, and that's why he's a very interesting artist.
Let me push that onto you. You go ahead. Well, sorry, long question.
I agree. I don't know how to answer. I think it's more like a comment, right? Or
I mean, I suppose it's in relation to some of the fantasization that even you started with
Mm-hmm.
you know,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think it is the event. He just did it. It was so, you know,
Yeah.
you do it. It's
Yeah.
theatrical, it's an event. It's poetry.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It's not like, it's not as formal as you think it is. It's a frame, but it's not art world object as in
Yeah,
total
no, yeah.
control.
I think his work is extremely poetic and really beautiful that way. Whether on some level it's funny or amusing or downright laughable, it has also this other element that makes you pause right when you're about to laugh at what he's done, which is easy to do when you're watching the films. You then suddenly realize that you're also watching something else that is much deeper and much more important than the laughter and the amusement. And it's the poetic side of what he was doing. I think he was very concerned with that.
Can I also add or put into the debate out of this his relation with language, because some works came out of notes, of words, of sentences that he wrote, like "thoughts unsaid, then forgotten," or "please don't leave me." There is this very straight connection with language. And with Mary Sue, and especially also Janice, would like to comment something on this, how this process happens in the artist work.
Something I was thinking about, or something I do think about, is this idea of always trying to knock all the poetry out of something to see if it actually doesn't reside somewhere else. And that's something I respond to in Bas Jan's work, as well as something I think try and achieve when I'm working.
For Mary Sue, I wondered what it was like when you were filming your husband falling off the roof, and you seemed like the perfect artist wife that you were able to film. I wondered whether you ever asked him not to do such dangerous things, or how you managed to deal with, possibly filming his last moments.
I never thought about it that way, never once. And I was always quite confident that he was going to be able to do what he was setting out to do, including he was going to be able to sail across the Atlantic in the smallest boat on record. Sorry. I forgot what it is. What's that? Oh, yeah. I didn't even think about that, except when it came to the sail on the smallest boat crossing the Atlantic Ocean. That was a bit too crazy for me, and I told him so. But inevitably, in the end, which was a good bit later, I had to let it go with him. He was going to do what he was going to do, and I was either going to get behind him, or I was going to suffer even more than I would have if I got behind him and let him go. That was a really very, very difficult process, and it continued after he was gone. So the process of letting him go has probably never stopped. And that's okay. That's all. Did that answer your question? Yeah. Okay.
Erik, would you like to add something to this question?
Well, maybe specifically about his ocean crossing. I probably should explain that I'm quite a keen ocean sailor myself. I partook in the Whitbread Round the World race as all the 4 legs in 77, 78. So I think I know to some extent what I'm talking about. many people sort of, when they ask about the risk, why did he do it, and should he not be stopped, I think that assumes that it was a very extremely risky undertaking. I don't think so. First of all, I think he did it the reason why a mountaineer would climb Everest, because, as the answer was, it's there. I think he had to do this. We had talked, actually, we had an agreement that we would, on his next transatlantic voyage, we would do it together. And when he sent a letter, I got a letter where he explained that he would come to Europe summer '75, and that he would do that by yacht. He would come sailing. I sent a letter back. This was all before the time of the internet and emails. I sent a letter back and said, wonderful that you're coming, but what is this? We had an agreement and we would do it together. The next letter came explaining, yes, no, I agree, but I have to do this alone. It has to be solo. It's part of a project. The boat's too small for two. But I'll still stick to my promise on a later occasion. And please don't tell our mother. Well, I kept that promise. And he explained what precautions he was making. He explained the project, and I fully backed it, in the sense that I was confident that the boat would be well prepared, and that he was very experienced, that he could do it. So there was not a moment of doubt in my mind that this should not be done. And I also understood, I think, on a very fundamental level, why he had to do it and what he was trying to achieve, and what he actually meant by being in search of the miraculous, and that it was extremely important to him. And that also, if I may, leads me back to, he didn't talk much about his art, but he talked through his art. It was very, I think, still to me at least, it's very clear what he was doing, and it was very clear why, what the essence was. But he also, I mentioned Camus. Of course, he also knew Wittgenstein. I don't have a good English translation for it, but I'll try from the German. That what you can't talk about, you should be quiet about. And I think that's basically the essence also of what he was showing and what he was doing. He was dealing with and talking about to us about things that you can't talk about through his art.
Another thing that I want to add is that on our third or fourth date, I don't know if you can hear me, but on my third or fourth date with him, which came 3 or 4 days after I met him, he said he was going to put together a raft, and he was going to put a sail on the raft, and he was going to take it to China. And I thought, well, geez, he had just come from Morocco, and so he was going to do that. And I thought, anything's better than that, almost. And I totally believed in his ability, his capability. And I believed that the boat was sound enough, and it was found, and in practically whole. And so I had a good reason for having that belief. It could have been a surefire thing that just went wrong in an instant. That was where something hit his head, or he slipped and fell over on a windy day. Could have been small things like that actually did the damage. But he was perfectly capable of doing it. That's something I always knew. And so even though I didn't want him to go, I mean, if he went, I knew he could do it.
Yeah, Peter was probably not known to the audience, but he had done transatlantic crossings, so he was very experienced. And as Mary Sue mentioned already, as a testimony to the seaworthiness of his boat. I mean, it was still floating afloat 9 months after he'd left.
Pedro, I think we have time for just one more very quick question, if that's okay.
Okay. Yep.
So you've explained that he will have people documenting you and friends, and you also his brother. I'm wondering who would be documenting In Search of the Miraculous when he sailed on this trip. What was going to be the formalization of the piece?
He was going to document it.
In how?
With film. He had a camera and a recorder, a tape recorder, and that was it. And he never, yeah. I read something today that said, I can't remember what, I think I know. In spite of rumors to the opposite, he never had any radio except for a shortwave radio. Is that what it's called? That would pick up weather reports, and that was it. We couldn't afford to get a radio that would be both a receiver and a transmitter. But he did have a signaling device that was supposed to connect between, when it hit the water, between that and an airplane going over. I mean, this was like 1975, and that was pretty advanced then. And now, of course, it's ridiculous. You can go and Skype somebody and let them know you're about to fall over the side or something. Or some little jiggle on the boat would tell somebody that something was going to happen. I'm very envious of that.
But maybe where he was unduly optimistic is that a camera and a recorder would survive that transatlantic voyage. I mean, a saltwater environment on a very small boat is the worst you can imagine.
Ridiculous.
I would like just to add something else that once I asked an artist, his generation, California artist, what he thought about In Search of the Miraculous as a work of art. What is conclusive, it was finished, it was, these were the conceptual artists, they were working with ideas. The idea was everything, no materialization was something secondary for them. And he told me that, he thought that it was a successful work, that the structure of the work was there, and that for him, that was Alan Rupert's, but I will say the name of him, that for him, that was an artwork.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. Someone else want to add something in conclusion?
Well, I'm not a connoisseur if it comes to art, but it is my feeling that in the triptych as he had envisioned it, and the first part of the triptych already almost does the job. I suppose it's his best work. It's the essence of his work. I think he cuts it to the core there.
Thank you. Well, thank you, Erik. Thank you, Janice. Thank you, Mary Sue. Thank you, Nick. Thank you, everybody.
Speaking about art and life is an old and tantalizing question, and that's why I find, I guess for a lot of people, myself included, returning to Bas Jan Ader's work is fascinating, because the relationship between art and life there, on the one hand, is very, very concisely formulated in the way how Janice was putting it, that it isolates certain key moments and stylizes these key moments or motifs to an extent that it almost feels like the poetry, as you were putting, is knocked out of them, because they're so isolated as motifs, while at the same time you do realize that there is an all-in investment, that while on the one hand this reads like a series of signifiers of signs and motifs, but undeniably, physically, emotionally, really, truly, existentially, the work thrives on a big investment. The body is always in, but the body that we're seeing is maybe not the body of Chris Burden. It's not a body that gets shot or like a more beefy body. It's a body that, while being completely invested, at the same time remains this kind of slender body of a tall, almost stickman-like figure. So it feels like when you're looking at the work, you can always look at it from two angles simultaneously. One is as a cipher, as a motif, something extremely isolated, almost allegorical, and at the same time something that is deeply invested with a body, with an emotion, with an existence, which is all in there, but not in the form of a story with a build-up. We only get the one isolated emotional punch or the core of the experience. So I guess in talking about it and making art in response to Bas Jan Ader, as many people have done, I think it's always returning to that conundrum, to that strange conflicting tension between something that is on the one hand stylistically very concise and refined and at the same time deeply existentially invested. And I think a lot of narratives that are then developed to bring these two things together, they gravitate towards something romantic, towards something tragic. You know, when the body is invested into the symbolic form, we see the hero, the tragic hero, when actually there is something so acute about the humor of the work and its conciseness that precisely all of that romantic decorum and big mythical, tragical, rhetorical apparatus is precisely what is absent from the work. So it always feels like if we push it too far over into tragedy or into the mythological, we're losing what's special about the work, which I guess for anyone making work in response or speaking in response makes it very difficult to speak about the work as a form and at the same time do justice to the work as the expression of a life lived in a particular way with a particular kind of commitment. So I want to just vacillate between these two different sides, the rhetorical conciseness and the existential experience at the heart of the work, by moving from one side to the other for 15 minutes, hopefully coming to no conclusion, but I try to tap into some of the experiences which I believe are somewhere there at the heart of the opacity of the work. And that's the funny thing about speculative thinking that tries to be empathic. It's trying to speculatively feel for that feeling which is somehow there. And it keeps growing, because the more people you talk to, the more people will also open up certain kind of emotional aspects of the work. I was fortunate enough now for 2 years to have an art student from Groningen, Niels Beckemer, and like in one of our first studio conversation, Niels was telling me, yeah, like he likes Bas Jan Ader because for him it's so much about Groningen. And it's like, wow. Well, that was a core experience that I never considered. It's like, you know, when you're from Groningen, you have a very particular experience of the horizon. You can look all the way into nothingness, into that horizon where things start appearing and disappearing, because the land is so flat. And please excuse this bad photo collage that I've now done, that he was saying, you know, when you're riding your bicycle against the wind, or you see the bicycle going towards the horizon, there's always that moment when you see the road stretching to the horizon and you see a bike disappear over the edge of the horizon. And for him, he said that was always what the work for him was about, a profound experience of that landscape, that on the horizon line you see the bikes fall over the edge of the world. And then you feel like, oh damn, yeah, that is growing up in a place, you know what that place feels like, and you live with that kernel of experience, and it might flash up in a work that is not about this. I don't think art is about anything, but it thrives on a particular experience, which student, future colleague Niels Beckemer explained to me as the very real life experience of seeing somebody drop over the edge of the horizon on this kind of threshold between appearance and disappearance. Which is, in a way, maybe, if you excuse another stupid collage, where I think like a disciplined reading would probably have to hold the work, kind of hold it there on the edge where it is about to disappear but keeps reappearing, where the film ends all over again and again and again, but it also starts again and again. So there is a figure appearing and disappearing on the edge of that horizon. And the other day I was trying to write about Alex Katz, and I was rereading some passages in Maurice Merleau-Ponty's phenomenological writings, and he speaks about memory. Interestingly, in that sense, he uses the same experience of seeing someone go towards the horizon, and he says, you know, that's like in memory, you just hold the person there in the same way that you would hold the person with your eyes when they go towards the horizon. When you're remembering somebody, that person is actually there. You're just holding them on the horizon of your experience. So that is maybe what a homage to an artist can do, or what I feel like a lot of people who've been making works in response to this work have been doing, like kind of holding him there on the horizon, just on the line between appearance and disappearance, where he's there with the work and the experience of operating on that horizon line, just hanging in there for a bit longer. What is that horizon line between art and life that ends with the fall? On the one hand, the hero who's hanging there could be a tragic hero, but we also know that in the history of modernity, the tragic hero has also assumed another body, which in the way how that body is dressed and operates might be much closer to the body of Bas Jan Ader. It's not necessarily, it could be Icarus falling if we wanted to mythologize it, but there is it's not just tragical, there is also something funny about someone dressed in black performing that symbolic gesture, which asserts the tragical motif of the fall, but does it, maybe to repeat what Janice Kerbel was saying before, in a way that kind of knocks some of the poetry out of it, till it gets an almost cartoonish character of the stickman hanging on the line. Yeah. At the same time, of course, while we have the Harold Lloyd, Buster Keaton legacy there, if we hear the title The Fall in a very shorthand, concise manner, it also resonates with the existentialist sentiment and experience of the time. No? The Fall, apart from the band, of course, is La Chute, The Fall by Camus. And in that sense, the existential question of an entire generation in the deepest possible way, why have I survived? No? That's the question that troubles Camus, describing how he watches a fall and has to live with the fact that as a storyteller he has not fallen, or like I guess the question of a generation who have seen many people die, but still persist to live, living with the question, why have I not fallen? Why am I not among the dead? Why am I among in the living? A question I think that is fundamentally unanswerable, but it might lead you into these experiments where you try out the possibility of the fall, knowing that as part of your generational experience you have seen people fall and disappear, but as being among the surviving, how else would you relate to that experience other than reliving it in a novel or reliving it in the shortest possible story that even carves out the story from the short story, a simple short version of the fall. Speaking of the existentialist idiom of the time, on the one hand, that is, il faut être engagé, to be fully engaged, to bring your body in, a body that is on the horizon of disappearance, a kind of a Giacometti body, a body that is precisely in between appearing and disappearing, a very slender body, a very determined body, a very serious body, a body that also in Giacometti eventually falls. But that serious commitment of existentialism that you could see in this investment, engagement of the body in the action, of course, is always offset, I would say, in this reading, by another no less existential body, an American body, a New World body that struggles to survive, but develops its very, very own humor of performing the fall. I guess that's, maybe it's a European perspective, that's, I guess, why I would love sincerely love someone like Buster Keaton because the existential struggle in all its seriousness is always there, together with a deep laughter. And in the same way that I feel we have the two-facedness of someone like Buster Keaton as clown and Beckett-like philosopher, I would always see a similar kind of dimension to Bas Jan Ader's work, kind of a doubling that on the one hand speaks about this kind of what Kierkegaard would call this existence upon death, and speaks about the engagement, the commitment to this existence upon death, almost in the sense of a kind of amor fati, a love of faith, which makes the Nightfall piece so strong. It's a way of saying yes to the inevitable, which is at the core of a deep existentialist commitment to say, like, we authorize our own death. We live our life, and to be engaged in life is to love your fate, to embrace your fate, which you see in this super short way enacted in the Nightfall movie, which I think you've seen this afternoon. Yeah, lifting. I mean, it's how you get yourself into trouble, no? But it's a way of affirming the inevitable by performing it yourself. So while it arguably, as in Buster Keaton's work, has this this hyperbolic caricaturesque edge to it, it is at the same time a funny way of saying, I'm gonna carry that load, no matter how impossible it is. In that way, you could read it as a kind of a tragical affirmation of your own mortality. Then the lights go out, but at the same time, in its deep humor, it's maybe also a way of saying, I'm gonna lift that load, and then something about the amor fati is actually deeply life affirming, to say, like, I'm not gonna deny it, I'm gonna perform my own disaster, but I'm gonna carry it in a particular way. What is the cartoonish version of existentialism, and how cartoonish was existentialism maybe in the first place already? And can you think of existentialists without cigarettes? No, for me that's my, Bas Jan Ader doing the serious man without the Coen brothers, but in the similar kind of spirit of the existentialist cartoon, all our favorite existential smokers in all their where in that moment, I don't know, I love it. It feels like some of the strange humor and commitment to your own mortality, chain smoking. I remember Pavel Büchler, artist from Prague, he was saying, back in those days in Prague we didn't have non-smoking and smoking, we just had chain smoking and smoking. That's the chain smoking thing, which on the one hand couldn't be more serious in its morbid commitment of existence upon death, but at the same time, if we take it from the French reading, it comes with a particular kind of cartoonish humor. And that's Hannah Arendt looking gorgeous with a fag in her mouth. You can read it in all its morbidness, but especially if you read it through someone like Arendt or Gainsborough, one shouldn't underestimate in all this kind of black turtleneck, chain smoking, cult of the mildly morbid, a deep commitment to life, or what Hannah Arendt calls the adventure of beginnings. No? You commit yourself to life, smoking, not knowing who you will meet next and where the adventure might take you. So, where the chain smoking, turtleneck wearing, black clothes wearing person on the one hand reads in this kind of terms of existential seriousness, I just wanted to bring in these aspects to stress that there is also something deeply life affirming in a way of kind of relating to mortality, relating to the death of the fall of others, but in the key of actually being the survivor, of actually taking on the load, being on the bike, and you keep smoking. The same could be said, and that's the smash it. No, like when the work is such a punch to the to the stomach emotionally, while at the same time, of course, it's cartoonishly rhetoric. And I guess you can play it into both sides. On the one hand, who would be closer to the too sad to tell you crying video than if we watch Bresson and we see Jeanne d'Arc in a state of grace, where her tears are really the confirmation of the fact that she's in a state of grace. She's feeling the sublime. She's in there. And as with Bresson, like a close-up orgy of a film, you know that the sheer kinetic effect of those tears is fired off at the audience, and in the same way that it's happening in The Passion of Jeanne d'Arc, where the people are genuinely moved by the tears, I also feel there's something fundamentally psychokinetic about that film. Like, it just makes you cry. In the same way that he was saying, I cried out of extreme sadness, and that extreme sadness as a kinetic cinematographic charge is in the movie, and he fires it off, and how can you not respond? While at the same time, and I guess that's you behind the camera, there is an extreme. This is also almost like a scientific experiment, no? While it fires off that emotional charge, it is also part of a test case scenario where a face is tested by the camera. No, and the tears cried in front of the objective are very much, a form of staging the emotion, very much reminiscent, I guess, of things that Godard was doing at the same time. No? Where if you watch Une femme est une femme, there is this key sequence when they have a fight, and she drops some eggs and goes like, "Oh my God!" Like, I detest people who cannot cry, and then almost as if she was doing a rhetorical demonstration, starts crying to the camera. And the scene continues with them having a fight in bed, where they take out the books from the bookshelf and have a completely consistent relationship battle just through quotes. This sense of an extreme rhetoricity of an emotion. Everybody who's ever had a relationship fight where you feel like, oh no, not again, fare una cenata, and then you go through the moves, but it doesn't mean that it's any less emotional. And that's the fine line that also Godard walks, when on the one hand you see the immense rhetoricity of the emotions, it's all quotes and citations, while at the same time undoubtedly like the energy is in the room. And in that sense, the energy is one that happens between the lovers, between those involved, but it also happens traditionally in the power battle between the diva and the camera. As Walter Benjamin says, the camera is testing the actor. And the traditional diva move would be to hold up your face against the camera. No, I'm not going to cry for this camera. I'm just going to, as in Warhol's screenshots, I'm just going to hold my face up and keep face in the face of the camera, testing me. Whereas Bas Jan Ader gives in to that brutality of the gaze of the camera that demands a certain emotion, and he relents. But in relenting and charging the image with that emotion, there is another kind of deeply pop cultural moment that creeps in, which is le monsieur ici ne me quitte pas. Only years after I wrote about the piece, I finally saw a television image of him performing Ne me quitte pas, and suddenly you see this man crying and saying, "Don't leave me, don't leave me, don't leave me, don't leave me, don't leave me. Ne me quitte pas." Zack, there you go. And where you suddenly feel like on the side of exploring a deeply rhetorical moment of pop culture, this work goes a very long way, to the point where it knocks out the poetry, till you find that it just simply as a rhetorical formula. Ne me quitte pas, please don't leave me. We don't need the actor, we don't need the cameras, we just have the spotlight. But still, while in its most carved out and almost hollowed out moment, obviously every conversation, every situation in the history of mankind's relationship fights in which that sentence has ever been uttered is there. No? the history. There's an understanding of this being a rhetorical shell, but a shell that resonates with the kind of deep archive, infinite memory of every situation in which that sentence has been uttered and will be uttered for future purposes. So precisely in the moment when it's hollowed out, suddenly the whole history of that emotion captured in that phrase rebounds in a particular way, maybe even stronger than if words, stories, and tears came together in front of a TV camera. We don't know. A last moment to come back to that ambiguity. I just want to bring in two women artists who I feel were walking a similar path at that time, looking at pop on the one hand as a repertoire of rhetorical formula, but the one that in a way in its rhetoricity bears a whole archive of emotions that's activated the moment that you commit your body to it. This is Pauline Botti, fantastic painter, first generation pop artist. You can see her in Pop Goes the Easel, then dropped from most history books because she in a way was too invested. But when you study her work, it has the same kind of total unashamed embrace of the emotionality of certain rhetorical forms, while there is always kind of the Gainsborough smile in the way how it the stylistic nature of that language is at the same time foregrounded. This is a fantastic painting that's in the Museum of Łódź called My Coloring Book. Is it Gainsborough? Is it Belmondo? I don't know. But it's basically taking the lines from a halfway cheesy song and illustrating them. As you read and watch that painting, you actually do understand that coloring book tells the story of a broken heart in a manner that is at the same time completely acknowledging that it's only pop, but we like it, while at the same time the emotional commitment just bounces at you precisely because the rhetoricity is acknowledged. If you see the original, it's actually letters stuck on the canvas. Super surface, but unashamedly charged with these emotions, if you will. So for me, that would be the risk and the challenge that this work still confronts us with, thinking on the one hand the carving out of the rhetorical form, and on the other hand an investment which is existential, very bodily, which we cannot just write off in mythological terms as a tragedy, where humor and a generational commitment to that strange life that you have to live are equally strongly present. And for me, the beautiful and still very troubling quality of the work is that you always find him walking the line between the stylized and the existential, the morbid and the deeply life-affirming, in ways where, even and especially when it's so concise, you don't get the feeling that it's just intention-driven or that anybody had a smart idea, but that the risk of knowing that this is part of a life from which it cannot be abstracted, it's always there. It's not a clean work, even though it's so concise. No? I want to leave you with one example of someone who I think walked the same line in the same kind of way that is troubling, because you never know how existential it is and how stylized it is. And I leave you with kind of 10 seconds of this performer talking about feelings. Nothing more than feeling. More than feelings of love. You know that? And then she stops. So thank you.